Now let's start looking at respiratory physiology. That is, ventilation is the first part of this. We'll then turn to gas exchange, which is going to be both internal and external gas exchange, that is moving oxygen and CO2 across the respiratory membrane or between the blood and the tissues. And then last, we'll look at gas transport. How do we move oxygen and carbon dioxide in our blood? So again, we're going to start with ventilation in this slide, and that's going to have to do with air pressure. Now, air pressure, the pressure exerted by air, or the gases in the air that surround the body. So think of it in this way. If you're standing down here at sea level, you've got this big column of air sitting on top of you. That is a pressure exerted on your body. The closer air, the air that's at lower altitude, is going to be thicker or more dense because the fact that that air is affected by gravity. Those gas molecules are going to be thicker down at the bottom. If I move to the top of Mount Everest, I have less air on top of me, and the air I do have on top of me is thinner. So therefore, it's a lower air pressure on top of me, so the air pressure in that area is lower. Pressure is typically measured in millimeters of mercury. Atmospheric pressure is 1 atmosphere is equal to 760 millimeters of mercury. We'll always talk about it in terms of millimeters of mercury, but sometimes you'll see sources that they listed as 1 atmosphere. Think of sea level is basically 760 millimeters of mercury, whereas if you look up at Mount Everest, it's only 250 millimeters of mercury, so it's much lower air pressure there. The pressure in our lungs sometimes is indicated as a plus or minus so many millimeters of mercury. As I already showed you on the intrapleural pressure, that is the pressure inside the pleural cavity, is at a -4. So it's always 4 millimeters of mercury less than whatever the pressure is in our lungs. Now, to understand how we ventilate, we need to look at one of the physics laws, and that's Boyle's law. Boyle's law is an inverse relationship of pressure and volume. So you can see that pressure equals 1 over volume. So if I increase volume, that's going to decrease pressure. If I decrease volume, I increase pressure. Or I can think of it in the reverse. If I increase pressure, I then decrease volume. Okay? Or if I increase pressure, I decrease volume. And you can see that in this relationship here. As volume increases, you can see the pressure is decreasing. Or I can think of this way, as I add more weight to the top, which is an increase in pressure, notice that the volume where the gas is decreases. Okay, now we're going to use that in our breathing, but why? How does that work? Well, airflow is always going to move from an area of great pressure to an area of lesser pressure. So if we can increase the volume in our lungs, we're going to decrease the pressure. That's Boyle's law. Opposite relationship between volume and pressure. So if I increase the volume, then I decrease the pressure inside my lungs. Now the pressure outside in the atmosphere is greater than the pressure in the lungs because I just expanded the lungs, made the volume bigger, which dropped the pressure. Pressure is greater outside the lungs than inside the lungs, so that way the air is going to move into the lungs. It's going to go from greater pressure to lesser pressure, and I'm inhaling. So how does this work? Well, when we expand our lungs, when we inhale, we're dropping the diaphragm. So the diaphragm, when it contracts, it flattens out more or lowers. Therefore, I expand the volume in my thoracic cavity. And since the lungs, remember those pleural membranes, are stuck to the wall of the thoracic cavity because of that negative intrapleural pressure, that means if I increase the size of my thoracic cavity, I increase the size of the lungs. So I have an increase in volume. Well, with an increase in volume, then I have a decrease in pressure according to Boyle's law. So air is going to want to rush in. It's going to go from greater pressure outside and move in to my lungs, so I inhale. On exhalation or expiration, now what I do is relax the diaphragm. The diaphragm moves back up, therefore I decrease the volume of my thoracic cavity and the lungs. Now, if I decrease the volume, that means an increase in pressure. So now the pressure in the lungs is greater than the pressure outside the lungs, so air is going to move out and I expire or exhale. Now inhalation again is once I get this greater pressure outside compared to inside, so that is I've dropped the pressure inside my lungs, air rushes in. It will continue to rush in until the two pressures are equalized. So as air moves in, the pressure obviously is going to go up in here, and so eventually the two volumes equalize and I'm done inhaling. Exhalation ends also when the two pressures are equalized, because as I relax the diaphragm, I decrease this volume, thereby increasing the pressure. Air is going to go from greater pressure out to lesser pressure, and it's going to continue to go out until the pressure in the lungs drops to about 760. Okay, so that will continue until the two are equalized. Okay, so you can see in this slide as well when it walks through the step-by-step procedures of inspiration and expiration. So looking at inspiration, we have inspiratory muscles contract, that's basically the diaphragm, and the external intercostals are often involved with this as well. That gets the thoracic cavity larger, the lungs are stretched, the interpulmonary volume increases, so inside the lungs it's bigger. That means the pressure drops inside the lungs since I made the volume bigger. With a lower pressure in the lungs compared to outside, air flows into the lungs until the two equalize. Expiration is when the inspiratory muscles relax, that is the diaphragm, and those external intercostals can relax. Thereby the thoracic cavity decreases in size. The intrapulmonary volume then is going to decrease, or inside the lungs the volume decreases. That makes the pressure bigger than the pressure outside, so air is going to flow out of the lungs until the two pressures, again between the inside the lungs and out here in the air, equalize. Now types of breathing is quiet breathing versus forced breathing. Quiet breathing is going to be simply in inhalation, it's the diaphragm and external intercostals that are contracting, but exhalation is passive, that is those muscles relax. So this is the kind of breathing you're doing right now watching this video. You're simply just nice, quiet inhalation, passive exhalation. Forced breathing is when you're going to be doing something like exercising. Here now you need more muscles involved because we need a bigger movement of air since we have a bigger oxygen demand while we're exercising. So inhalation is going to be still the diaphragm and external intercostals, but also we're going to throw in some accessory muscles. A couple of them include the sternocleidomastoid and the pectoralis minor that help lift the chest and thereby expand the thoracic cavity. Exhalation now is no longer passive, it's active because it involves relaxation of those inspiratory muscles, but also contraction of other muscles like internal intercostals and the abdomen. If you think about it, you contract your abdominal muscles, you kind of throw or squeeze the abdominal cavity, and that pushes the diaphragm up, so you're going to get a stronger exhalation. Now Boyle's law can be applied to scuba diving, and one of the things when I took scuba diving I learned is that you need to keep breathing as you ascend. In other words, you don't want to hold your breath and then ascend to the top. The reason being is that, remember, the surface of the water is at 1 atmosphere. 20 meters down, because now you've got all this heavy water on top of you, the pressure is much greater at 3 atmospheres. So just 20 meters down means 3 times the amount of pressure on you. So if I hold my breath at 20 meters at 3 atmospheres, the volume there is, let's say 6 liters. Okay, typical inhalation of volume. Okay, now I hold my breath. I go to 10 meters, I'm only at 2 atmospheres. Well, that means then it's going to end up being 12 liters of volume. Remember, if I decrease pressure, I'm going to increase volume. And then if I go to the surface, now I'm down at 1 atmosphere, and the volume is going to increase to 18 liters. Well, your lungs can't hold 18 liters, so that means they're going to burst. You get a pulmonary barotrauma, that is the lung ruptures. And then that can end up causing, of course, lung tissue damage, lead to a pneumothorax or air embolism. So in scuba diving, you don't hold your breath as you ascend to the surface. because of Boyle's law. So next, let's look at the lung volumes and rates in the next video lecture.